I wanted to talk sort of about the logistics of this first because this is a story. It's complicated. It's in a lot of ways paper based. So you need law enforcement to walk you through that. You need all the principles. What was that like to negotiate that and to get them comfortable with you to tell their stories?
Well, yeah, I mean that's you're talking to the heart of the documentary. You know that we always start with honesty. We went to FBI, Castro first. Went to FBI, went to IRS, and we just told them the story that we understood and the story that we wanted to tell. Not holding any punches, saying who we are. And then as soon as they said yes, we, you know, were attached to a fire hose and we had to try and keep all the water inside. Um, but yeah, logistically, we have this line that Castro and I joke about is that, Steve Pennington is an IRS agent. He has to turn a tax form. He has to turn O and ones into O's and R's because you have to be interested in it. And that's what we did. We sequestered ourselves away in a hotel room in Austin, Texas, and we put cards on the wall, recreated a beautiful mind, and found the best way to tell the story.
Yeah, and when when they prosecute the Zetas, Doug Gardner, Steve Pennington, Scott Lawson all need to testify and explain to a jury of 12 civilians what money laundering is, what quarter horse racing is, what a cartel is. So they're well versed in sort of explaining it in layman's terms. So especially Steve was very helpful in that sense.
And we have the same problem. We don't have a jury of 12 peers, but we do have an audience that has to listen and pay attention.
Well, the other side of that is that if this was a documentary about a serial killer, you would have someone from the serial killer side talking to you, family, friends. Oh, he was a nice guy when he wasn't killing people, whatever. And you don't have that. You're not going to have someone from the cartel pop up and say, well, sure, they killed people, but they were family men. So you've got to figure out how to frame them for the audience in a way that's honest about their crimes, but you don't have anyone who can actually say that on camera.
This is where Castro is going to tell you our favorite story.
Yeah, we during production, throughout the production, we reached out with members of the cartel, people who had been indicted on these charges, and we finally got a call back. We were in a parking lot in Austin having dinner, and we had a call back. We had a good conversation with him. I won't share his name, and he said, "I tell you what, let's meet up and have a conversation face to face." And Dan and I kind of looked at each other like, "Well, here we go." And we asked him where he wants to meet and when. And so, we're expecting longitude, latitude, a
I
white
got a pen ready,
up, a burlap sack, and they take us out into the desert and we have a conversation, And instead he says, the mall in downtown Austin? Yeah. You know the Cheesecake Factory? I said, yes. He says, I love the Cheesecake Factory. Let's meet. And so Dan and I get there 10 minutes early. We do our worst scoping of the parking lot. And we sit down and we meet a guy that loves horses. And we meet a guy who likes fettuccine Alfredo. And Dan and I are kind of sitting there looking at each other going, here we are with an indicted member of the cartel, or at least the crime ring, at the Cheesecake Factory. And you realize, in a lot of ways, nothing is what it seems on either side.
Well, that seems like one of the challenges initially with the audience is most people have no idea that this type of thing is out there. I was just reading some stuff about the fact that the cartels control most of the avocado crops in Mexico, which you wouldn't think of, So framing this in a way for the audience of, no, this is out there. This is a lot more common than you think, and this is really what life is like on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's to the point of Castro and I didn't want to make a show about violence. And when you think of the cartel, the first thing you think about is violence. If you Google Los Zetas, the first thing that comes up is they're the most deadly cartel in Mexico. And people's understanding of them stops there. And I understand that. We understand that because it's brutal, it's awful, it's horrific. And it is a diabolical tool of power. We wanted to go a little bit further to exactly your point, is to understand that they could be leaders of Fortune 500 companies. They hire very smart people to do nefarious things, accountants, lawyers, bankers. Their incentive is money. They want money because that money gives you legitimate power, and legitimate power makes them extremely powerful. And that's the story we wanted to tell. Yeah, they're in the avocado business. They're in the tortilla business. They're in anytime. That was sort of Zeta's calling card, was they took organized crime one level further, and they just controlled any transactional things that were happening, any exports that were happening. And that's a really fascinating story, and it's a much more global story.
Yeah, I think the cartel is principally a business organization, a criminal one at that, and they sell drugs because that generates the greatest margins for them. I believe if refrigerators generated greatest margins, they'd be in the refrigerator business. But they're out to make money, and Steve says it. He says in a lot of ways these might have been CEOs of a Fortune 500 company in a different world. They're very organized, very smart, lawyers and accountants running the books, just like a Walmart or a Target would.
One of the things that struck me watching this is that, um, the whole idea of the stories about immigration and border crossings and all of this stuff looks so much different if you're in Laredo as opposed to if you're in Laramie, Wyoming. And it's not that it's a better or worse way of framing the issue, but it looks differently. And I don't think most people in the U.S. just realize what it's like to live in a border town where violence is a 2-minute drive away.
Yeah, I also don't think they understand because they don't get to see how that community is torn apart. Melissa said it. Melissa says it in her tears. It's very hard for her to talk about because she used to share that community on both sides. And to your point, they don't see that. It looks very different across the country. And hopefully this documentary will allow you to see a little bit more of a bigger picture, allow your aperture to get a bit bigger, and see that it is a much more global, it's a we problem. It's not an us and them problem.
I think we refer to them it as the border and them as border towns. They call it home. So it's intensely personal for them in a way that it's difficult to be unless that's your home. So we wanted to kind of put the audience in that chair and see if we can get them to kind of feel that same thing.
Now, this is obviously such a complex story, and while there's a resolution at the end of it, I suspect some threads that you wish you could have followed, but were sort of tangential to the story. Was there one in particular where you thought, in a different life, this would be an interesting story to tell. We just can't tell it in this documentary.
Man, I don't know where to start with that, but yes, I think one is like, and she's in our documentary, but Ginger Thompson is there. I would encourage anyone that watches this to read some of Ginger Thompson's writings, specifically about the massacre in Allende. An incredibly powerful and moving story that is devastating. She wrote about that. She knows about that. But I think we told the best story we could. I think we found that this was the way to make people care. It was the way to tell an exciting story, an adventurous story, and the story of a group of people that did not stop when the goal in front of them was enormous. They did not succumb to the weight of what they couldn't do. They just believed in themselves and took one step forward every time.
Now, do you either one of you have any sense of why at the end of the day there wasn't violence surrounding the trials? Because there were certainly a lot of hints that it was there, but for whatever reason the cartel decided, no, we're not going to take it to that level.
And who knows why things don't happen. But I think the people involved, the law enforcement, the journalists, they did everything they possibly could to keep themselves safe. And I'm glad they did.
There was always the threat of violence. There was a gentleman requesting blueprints for the courthouse in Austin leading up to the trial. And those are the kind of things, I mean, you see it in episode 4. Even post-indictment, there's still more story. There's still a bribery story. So it really never stopped. But yeah, I think that's what makes them brave. There was always that threat. It never let up.
That's probably a good way to end this with this question, which is, obviously, you guys, you're doing this from the U.S. side. You're relatively safe doing it. It's not, yeah, I'm sure there were some concerns, but still, it's not a super dangerous situation compared to, have you ever thought what it would have been like to try and tell this story from the other side of the border?
I mean, I think we did get the participation from the other side of the border, and that story is there to tell. But I think we reflected it as best we could in the people that were there for us. I mean, Juan Cedillo coming across to tell us that story; those are fascinating stories to tell. And I think we did the best that we could do to show that this is not an us and them problem. Like we said, it's you can't delineate them sometimes because they're so powerful that it affects all of us. And that was important to us.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys doing this really great documentary. I hope that a lot of people see it and use it as a way to sort of get into the subject a little bit more.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate the in-depth watch.